I'm going to read you a direct quote from Scott Bessent, who is the Treasury Secretary of the United States. He says, "I am very, very optimistic for 2026. We have set the table for a very strong, non-inflationary growth economy." In my opinion, the Federal Reserve is going to prove him very, very wrong. So let's talk about it so you can prepare as well. As always, my name is Derek. I got my degree in finance, so you don't have to. Let's dive right in. First and foremost, Scott Bessent, he is by all intents and purposes a smart guy. So why come out and say this? Well, he is now politicized because he is in Trump's administration. So of course, he has to say things in a positive light. With that said, the key part that I disagree here with is a non-inflationary economy. So first and foremost, to the average person, that might sound like there won't be inflation. Trump has also said that there's no inflation. Of course, that's not the case. The Federal Reserve's target rate of inflation is 2%. So as someone with a background in finance, I would more so take that as he believes inflation is going to be close to that 2% target. Right now, inflation on the CPI is at 3%. So 50% higher than where the Federal Reserve wants it. By every metric, PCE, CPI, core inflation, or headline, we're not at 2%. When you look into 2026, there are a couple things that are certain, and there are a couple things that are maybe possibilities, and none of them say non-inflationary. The first is the Federal Reserve is going to end its quantitative tightening program in December, so right around the corner. Remember, quantitative tightening and quantitative easing are just another way that the Federal Reserve controls inflation. Quantitative tightening is when they're pulling liquidity out of the market by selling bonds, because you have a reverse relationship, right? You sell bonds, you pull money out of the market. There are some accounts, myself included, that while it has not been said by the Federal Reserve that quantitative easing will return, which would be the opposite. This is pushing liquidity into the market by taking bonds off the market, buying bonds. While it hasn't directly been said, what follows the end of quantitative tightening? This interim period, but where they keep the balance sheet, relatively stable. But in my opinion, in 2026, quantitative easing is at least a very real possibility, together with, of course, lower interest rates. And that is because the Federal Reserve is in this very weird place where stagflation is a very real threat. Stagflation being just a stagnant economy and increased inflation, that's a very real threat because we've been fighting inflation for the better part of 2 years through increased interest rates. Inflation has not gotten to its target rate. It's looked sticky basically the entire time, yet the Federal Reserve is now forced to cut their interest rates because the jobs market is very clearly weaker than expected. Not just recently, but when you have a revision of close to 1 million jobs, 911,000 jobs from, I believe, March of 2024 to April of 2024 to March of 2025, that is massive. That means that even Biden's economy was 1 million jobs weaker over the last year. And then when you look under Trump's economy, and we just say presidents because it's easy to talk about, but I've made videos where the president doesn't really have direct control over the economy, but Trump's economy is also looking not that great. You have major revisions, one after the other. You have the BLS canceling the October jobs report, which the Bureau of Labor Statistics wasn't able to collect the data for that report, although October was probably going to be disastrous. On top of that, you have the September report, which was released, which did look good. It was better than expected, 119,000 jobs added, but unemployment still ticked up. Remember, the Federal Reserve cares about the unemployment rate. When they look at the jobs market, that's one of the main metrics that they look at. Now, the November report is delayed until after the Federal Reserve's next meeting. So you can tell that there is I don't want to say confusion, but disagreement in the Fed because they rarely publicly disagree, the Board of Governors and other members. But when you look at the current consensus, there is no consensus. We don't know if they're going to cut rates in December or not. When you look at the CME Fed Watch tool, it's a mess. Usually there is a very clear market consensus on the CME Fed Watch, but there isn't. I mean, the odds are not, usually it's like a 90% or above one direction or the other. That's not the case because people don't know. So the Fed is in this weird spot where Do they cut interest rates? Do they continue cutting interest rates or not? Because they have both problems to deal with. They have inflation and a weakening jobs market to deal with. That is a bad spot moving into 2026. And if the jobs market continues to decline, even if we have inflation, this is my opinion where it starts to get concerning. If the jobs market continues to weaken and weaken and weaken, and regardless of where inflation is, remember the Federal Reserve projects inflation to actually slightly increase through the end of the year. So regardless of where inflation is, they are going to save the jobs market. They're going to save that, and they're going to cut rates to do so, possibly even faster than they currently are, especially if they start to get behind the eight ball, right? And then if that doesn't work, what comes next? What is the next major tool in their toolbox? Their very limited toolbox? It's quantitative easing. And if that is the case, we are going to have the complete opposite of what Scott Bessent is saying. We're going to have an inflationary economy in 2026 and not a very strong economy in 2026. In fact, 2026 looks like it's going to be a weaker economy, not a stronger one, because we are still reeling from inflation and having to deal with a continually weakening jobs market. And that's just not going to suddenly stop because January 1st comes around. Okay, that is just not going to magically disappear. So I don't want to drag this video out longer than it needs to be. I think Scott Bessent is very well aware of this. I think he has to be slightly positive, optimistic, because he is now politicized, because he is part of the Trump administration. He is not just a financier who can just say what he wants. So we'll have to wait and see. But if it were my guess, my bet, it's not going to be a non-inflationary 2026. So with that said, if this video was informative, if it was blunt, straight to the point, no BS, and if that resonated with you, please consider subscribing. It's difficult to grow here on YouTube, so every subscription genuinely means the world to me. If you like personal finance, world economics, and investing, you are in the right place. So I hope to see you in the next video, which they're supposed to be weekly, but we live in a crazy economic world, so they have been much more frequent. So I'll probably see you very, very shortly. With that said, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care.